Hi everyone, welcome back to Mess to Masterpiece. Today's topic is feeding tubes. And so I want to talk about, there's a bunch of different types of feeding tubes. So first off, there are two different types that they put in your nose. One is called a nasogastric, or it's an NG tube. And so that typically goes into your stomach. It passes through your nose, and it goes down your esophagus into your stomach. The other type, which is actually the type I had about a year ago, is called an NJ. And it goes down farther into your intestines, which is a nasojejunal. So if you see somebody with a tube, that's typically what it is. It's either an NJ or an NG tube. Then in your abdomen, there are two different types. There's multiple different types, but two commons. There's a PEG, which stands for, I'm going to read the technical terms. It's percutaneous endoscopic gastrostomy. So again, the G part makes it go into the stomach. But a PEJ is more rare. That's actually what I had when I had one in my abdomen. And it goes into your jejunum, which is lower down into your intestines. So it skips your stomach and goes lower. There's also G tubes or J tubes. You might hear that too. Lots of different reasons that people would get either one, depending on what organs are working properly and what not. So with that consideration, there's different ages. People get feeding tubes at different ages and for different reasons. So just don't assume that it's because people won't eat, or maybe that they have an eating disorder. Lots of different reasons that I learned as I had a feeding tube, and just a lot of things that people will judge that aren't necessarily are true. There's several different myths associated with feeding tubes. You can't eat by mouth with a feeding tube. That's not always the case. A lot of the times, the feeding tube is used as a supplement in order to add to whatever the food that the person is able to eat. In my case, I wasn't able to eat, and so that was the complete source of my nutrition. So just depending on the reasoning of why they're placing the tube, will depend on if you're able to eat or not. Another thing that's a myth is tube feeding is forever. The ideal goal is that you don't have to have a feeding tube forever. In my case, it was because it failed, and so that's why I don't have a feeding tube now. But other people, they have great success, and then they're able to get their digestive tract moving again and able to get off a feeding tube. You don't have to have a nurse like 24/7 or be in the hospital to be on a feeding tube. Parents or caregivers can learn, and or if you're like someone like me, I was 25 when I had mine, and so I was able to learn from amazing nurses and a team from my durable medical equipment. They taught me the ropes and were really awesome about if I had questions or anything like that. You can also use, there's lots of different type of formulas. Just because that you're on feeding tube doesn't mean that you have to necessarily use a formula. This is the formula that I used. It was called Cape Farms Peptide. It was already broken down, and so it's more organic. I had to pay out of pocket. Unfortunately, my insurance didn't cover it. But this is an alternative for those people that have allergies like me. That did fairly well for me for many months. And there's lots of different types of Cape Farms if you've never checked it out. You can also do blended up foods. There's several different companies that do that, or you can do your own. Breast milk is another possibility for babies that they just might need it a different way by going through the feeding tube, but you can still use the actual breast milk. So that's another interesting fact about feeding tubes. As far as supplies, most common, you'll either have a pump, which is what I had, which regulated the rate at which my feeds came in. I was a 24/7 feed, so I was constantly, that's what I used. And initially, I was just a couple, at night I would eat. I would be hooked up, and then it turned to where I had to be all day because the rate had to be turned down. But it just depends on, again, what your needs are. It will depend on how long that you're hooked up to a feeding tube. But syringes, tape, the pumps, the bags, those are just some of the basic things that you'll need. It's not too extensive. You guys have seen, I have a video about TPN. So comparing feeding tube and TPN life, TPN is much more extensive compared to a feeding tube, but it can still be overwhelming if you're starting for the first time. Let's see. The Oley Foundation, OLEY, is a great resource that I found. They have lots of different videos and articles and people that have support groups and things like that to get your questions answered for those of you that have feeding tubes. And they talk about the different types of feeding tubes way better than I could. So that's a great resource if you are going to be experiencing a feeding tube. Another thing to keep in mind, there are some problems that can happen with feeding tubes. Again, just to kind of be aware, they can kink. My NJ tube, the first NJ tube that I got, I had about a month, and I started experiencing a severe amount of pain, and it ended up, long story short, we had to pull the tube out. I was completely awake, so that was a crazy feeling. But once we got it out, we saw that there was a kink in the bottom of the tube, so that was crazy. But that can happen. Also, it can fall out. Especially if you have a tube that goes into your abdomen, it can fall out. The balloon can pop. Also, another thing with a tube that's in your abdomen, infection. Also, another thing that can occur long term is gastroparesis or dysmotility. That's what happened to me. I was on a feeding tube from July 2019 until and I had an NJ until the middle of September of 2019, where I had surgery and had a PEG put in, and I was so excited because I thought, this is going to save so much hassle. It's out of my nose, it's out of my hair, it's, the formula, this will be better. But then I ended up getting really sick, and my gut just didn't move, and so it wasn't absorbing the nutrition or medicines or anything. And so that gastroparesis and dysmotility became my life, and so unfortunately that is what prevented me from keeping my feeding tube and being able to use it. But hopefully eventually I'll get back there to the feeding tube. I definitely felt really well in the beginning of my feeding tube journey. The first couple of months was probably the best that I felt had been feeling, just being able to get that consistent source of nutrition. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. If with anything of those problems, though, whether it falls out or you start to have a lot of pain, definitely seek medical attention. That's really important. So this next little video, you're going to be able to see a little bit more of a glimpse of feeding tube life. And this was taken actually last summer. And so this was when I had a feeding tube. I hadn't had it very long.
So first you got to flush this thing out. Just put it in there. It's coming out today. Ooh, there, I can feel it. Just put it in a little bit at a time. So that's what they call flushing it. Then we get to the medicine part. So for these little capsule things, they like pull apart. It's kind of cool. You just pull it apart and then it'll become like a powder. I can get it. Eek. And you just pour it out. And then I'll dump all of those into those pills, all the same kind. They can't mix, the pills can't mix at all. They have to be flushed separately, and then I have to flush it with each individual one. So like those the same pill though, they can go together. If it's not a powder, and then I'll put some water in with this to flush it. But then I have to use this little pill crusher thing. Kind of can help get anger out, I guess-ish. Just like twist it, and then I'll mix it with water too, and then it'll go into my tube. Okay, so while I just mixed those, there's 1 cup, 2 cups, And then this one's kind of cool. It's yellow. Looks like Mountain Dew, maybe not quite as good. So once I get a mix, that's just 3 pills, and then I have to suck it up with this little syringe, and then I'll put it in, and then I'll do another one, or then I'll rinse it, and then I'll do another one, and then I have 3 done and 6 more to go. So quite fun. Okay, this one might be a little wild. See how there's a lot of air in there? I'm working on getting better, but it's not the greatest. So if I stick it in there, you can already see it's like bubbling over. I'll get better. See if it doesn't explode on me. Oh, I did better. Yeah, earlier the yellow went all over with the ceiling. Okay, so now we're finally to the formula process. There's my little formula. My cups, I've already put one. So I'll fill that up with a little bit of water. When they get too hot, because then it hurts the back of my feet. Then there's lots of good things about hotels, but this little cups and sticks are handy. Let's mix all this up. And this is what's gonna go in the bag, which I'll show you in a little bit. Okay, friends, here's the next part. I got to put the little formula in the bag. And I figure out how to program this little guy. And now you can see the little tube. It's running down. And then it comes into my nose. I won't show you that part, but it just goes up into my nose, and now I'm hooked up.
Okay, so hopefully that video gave you a little bit more of a glimpse of feeding tube life. As you can see, I was brand new to feeding tube life, and so it was literally squirting all over the place. And I had gotten my hair cut prior to that, prior to getting a feeding tube, and definitely it was a good choice because I had to wash my hair I don't know how many times after it exploded or whatever. But so that's feeding tube life. Again, I had in the video an NJ tube, and it ended up, you could see I started out with that powder formula, which is a type of formula, and then like I said, I went to Cape Farms. But yep, so that's feeding tube life. If you have any questions, feel free to message me or comment on this below. But I hope that helps.